Hey everyone, it's Smarty Pants Chess, and this is the CCC11 finals game between Stockfish and Leela Chess Zero. It's game number 25. Stockfish plays white, Leela plays black. In this game, it starts with a King's Indian. So the opening book is d4, knight to f6, c4, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, e4, d6, knight to f3, and castles by black. Bishop to e2 and e5 from black, castles, knight c6, d5 and then knight to e7, and this is the end of the book move. And we're into a King's Indian, so we know what's going to happen here. Black's going to attack Kingside and white's going to try and attack on the Queenside. So Stockfish plays the main move, which is knight to e1, and also Leela plays the main move, knight to d7. Basically both sides clearing the ranks for the f3 and f5 push. White plays f3 to defend e4, and Leela plays f5 to hit out of the centre. Now typically white can play g4 here if they wish. Play would continue king h8 and knight to d3. Black can attempt to play f4 at some point to try and block up the position, but typically the usual moves in this position from the opening book are knight to g8, king h1, and black can play a5. Then rook g1 and f4. This seems to be the most common moves played by human players anyway. But it's not necessarily good, it's just even for both sides. But in this position Stockfish didn't play g4, they played knight to d3, rerouting their knight to the centre, preparing maybe for a c5 push. So here Leela does actually block up the position. She plays f4 and prepares the moves g5 and h5, where they're going to go for a pawn storm and attack the white king. White plays b4, and black has to be a bit careful. If they decide to play a5 here, this is actually quite bad because it wastes the tempo. White can play b takes a5, rook takes a5 and continue with bishop to d2 and develop, attacking the rook inadvertently. If the rook retreats, then white just gains more time with knight to b5, and if g5, they can play a4, rook f6 as black gets on with their attack, but then white's attack comes first with bishop to b4, let's say b6, and white can play moves like a5, and their attack hits first. So in this position, black should not be wasting any time on the queen side, instead you should be going for the king side with g5. Stockfish plays c5, and again, black just ignores this and plays h5. Stockfish plays a4, and Leela continued with knight to g6, so getting one of their pieces into the attack, and getting it out of the way of the queen so that can join in as well. White plays c6, so attacks the knight, and now Leela has to make up a decision. If she takes this pawn with b takes c6, then d takes c6 can be played, knight to f6 and then b5. This is of course playable because black can play bishop to e6, but after knight b4, g4 takes and rook a3, white's no worse in this position, and in fact Stockfish actually gives white a slightly better here. I think it's because this d5 square is opened up for opportunities with these two knights, and now his rook screams across the board as well. Helps with the defence and attack at the same time. So Leela played knight to f6 rather than take this pawn off, and Stockfish plays b5. And Stockfish has got an amazing triangular pawn structure here. It's like one of Alexander the Great's Macedonian charges where he's at the front here. This is Alexander right now. But this is an extremely strong structure. The only problem is it sort of screens all of white's pieces out of the defence at this particular moment. And black is pretty much free to start pushing these pawns up at will. And this is kind of what Leela does. Next move she plays is bishop to h6. So gets off the g file, maybe prepares king h8 and rook to g8. Stockfish plays rook a3 and then rook f7 from Leela. Stockfish gets one of the knights back to f2 to defend, and as predicted king h8, and Stockfish takes on b7 and black recaptures. And now knight to a2 from Stockfish, and their plan is quite clear, just to use this rook to defend, and also going to play knight b4 and knight c6 and try and get on this nice juicy square. Leela plays queen to g8, so Leela is now preparing the attack on the g4 h4 push. Stockfish plays knight to b4 as predicted, and Leela goes to bishop to c8. So gets another piece into this attack. So she's got the knight and the bishops all converging on this point, the queen as well, and possibly the rook. So that's about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pieces in the attack for Leela. And maybe 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces, 5 pieces in the defence for white. But now white has got some chances on the queen side as well, so it's going to be a very interesting finish to this game. So Stockfish tries to defend, plays h3 to stop the g4 advance. Now g4 is possible here, but I think white gains an advantage because if we have a look, if takes, and black may be able to play bishop to g5, but after rook h3 with check, black plays rook h7, white can play g3, and if takes, bishop h6 to move away from the knight, g takes f4, e takes f4, and knight to d3. It seems like white is okay now and has the advantage because they're going to start taking this pawn off. And actually the pawn structure now favours whites because this bishop is still in a white square. It's going to be very tricky for black to win this game, I would imagine. So Leela is a bit more patient. She's quite a patient engine. She played knight to h4, prepares g4 once again because it opens up the queen, and probably black will play rook to g7. White goes in for knight c6. It looks really strong there, but to be honest it's not really doing much at this particular moment, but it looks very impressive. Leela plays bishop to d7, so I guess the plan is that black can take this knight off at any point when the opportune moment arises. Stockfish plays queen to e1 and Leela plays rook h7. So it seems that Leela's pieces are all in place for this attack, she's just waiting. Stockfish played a5 and now Leela finally hits in with g4, threatening g takes h3 and queen takes g2 with mate. So white captures this with the f-pawn. This unleashes their rook on the third rank as we've seen previously. But again in this position Leela is very patient. She could capture on g4 with the h-pawn, but then would come takes, and most likely everything will get swapped off with knight takes g4, knight takes g4, bishop takes g4, and then queen takes h4. Black will probably play bishop takes e2, queen to f6, queen to g7, takes, and maybe white could even go in for b6 here. So maybe black does have the edge actually, because after rook a8 there's rook f2 to defend the g-pawn, attacking the bishop though. Here though black has a nice move f3. And after bishop takes h6, rook takes g2, rook takes g2, takes, and king h1 the only move. Black can take on b6, bishop e3, f2 to take this pawn off, takes, and knight to c8. So after everything has cleared up, black's actually got more pawns, but most likely it will be taken. So it looks like a dead draw, to be honest, in this position. For instance, black may be able to play bishop to f3 and start hoovering up these pawns as well. So after all that, it's a dead draw. So maybe that's the reason why Leela is patient. She plays rook f8 instead of taking this g4 pawn instead. Stockfish plays b6, so they're advancing on the queen side, trying to get a queen. But Leela just takes this off, very simple. A takes b6, A takes b6. And to be honest, Stockfish has lost all their counterplay on the queen side now, and all the action is on the king side. Stockfish played queen to d1, Leela played queen to g6, bishop to b2 from Stockfish. So Stockfish is being quite tricky here. There must be some sort of sack coming up on e5 if the opportune moment arises. White would at least gain 2 pawns for this sack if it ever occurred, so they've always got that in the back pocket. For that reason I think Leela plays rook e8 to defend this pawn. Stockfish played rook to e1 and Leela played b5. This is a very unusual move. I think it's to divert the bishop away, because if bishop takes b5, black may be able to take this g4 pawn, and if knight takes h takes, then bishop takes g4 would finish white off. If queen to c2, maybe Leela can play rook to g8, and even if knight takes e5 here, if d takes e5 bishop takes, black's always got bishop g7, and takes, and it looks as though black is actually really good in this position. They've got 3 pieces converging on this G file and the knight as well, so that's very powerful. So b5 is a bit of a diverting move. But as anticipated, Stockfish doesn't fall for these kind of cheap tricks, so he played knight to b4. Leela played rook g7, still converging on this G file. And Stockfish does actually go back with knight to c6. Again, threatening to play maybe knight takes e5 at the opportune moment. But now Leela decides to take on g4, h takes g4, h takes g4, and now everything pretty much gets traded off. So the knight takes, the bishop takes, the bishop takes, the knight takes, and then they swap queens, and the rook takes. And the smoke has pretty much cleared now, and black has emerged maybe an extra pawn up, and now the rook and the knight are also converging on g2. So white's got to be careful, because if they play rook e2 to defend, black's got moves like f3. And if rook f2, black can play rook takes e4. And if takes on f3, black has a rook e1 check. And if king h2, bishop f4. And this actually leads to mate, unbelievably. After king h3, there's rook h1, king g4, and rook to g8. And after king h5, knight to g2 is checkmate, with like a lawnmower, where the 2 rooks have converged to mate the white king amazingly. So black's king is actually rather safe, and white's got to watch out. Rook h3 was played by Stockfish, so using this open h file against black, but Leela took on g2 with check. King went to h1 and black took on b2. So basically they traded pieces because Stockfish took this knight off, and Leela played king h7 to defend this bishop. Stockfish played rook g1 and Leela played f3. So it looks as though black is going to win this game, just because now they've got 2 passed pawns, one on the b file, one on the f file. Rook f1 to stop this f pawn, but Leela gets behind it with rook f8. Rook h3 to attack it twice, but now Leela decides to attack white's pawns with rook to e2. And another trade occurs, so takes is played, rook takes, and again Leela's got to be a bit careful here, because if rook takes e4, white may be able to play rook f6 and pick up the d6 pawn. So Leela is actually really clever. She plays bishop to e3 first. The point is that if rook f6, black can always play bishop c5 and protect the key pawn. So in the game, Stockfish went rook to g3 to keep the king on h7 away from the action. Bishop to d4, knight to e7, bishop c5. And I'll just breeze through some of these moves quite quickly, because basically, so Leela's just taken e4 pawn, and there's a lot of checks given by Stockfish. This is why I'm going through it quite quickly, because basically Leela just starts winning all these pawns. So Leela just brought a king in and took these 2 pawns. King takes d5, the knight's attacked. After knight to d8, king c4, this looks like it's game, because there's no way to stop these pawns now. And Leela does indeed get a queen, and this is pretty much the end of the game, because Leela just starts messing about now. So back and forth with the queen. I'll just go through it quicker. So basically this is a 1 endgame. Leela has a chance to get another queen here if she wished, but she just gives it up for no reason, which is weird. And now we're actually into a rather difficult endgame, so I was quite interested to see how Leela won this. But she just basically checks the white king around, and we get into like a really nice position for black, where Leela checks here and uses the power of triangulation to check king g7 and queen to g4. So eventually she picks up this rook. I mean, this was completely unnecessary, so maybe they need to fix this with Leela, because I'm not sure why she does all these weird endgame moves. But eventually she wins with checkmate. So if we just go back in this position, it seems as though this b5 pawn was actually incredibly key to winning the game for black. And I guess white just squandered their opportunity on the queen side, and that's very much what it looks like to me. I feel like in this position, white maybe should just hold back and use their advantage at a later date. After they played a5 and g4 takes, rook f8. Maybe Stockfish should just leave b6 alone. They played b6 in the game, but maybe they could play another move here and just simply hold on. Because basically b6 gave up a pawn, and this is actually key to winning the game. If we fast forward very quickly, we're getting to this position, and this is just a complete win endgame for Leela because she's got a passed b pawn that's going to get queened, even though she does mess about a lot in the endgame. So yeah, this was a bit of a weird game, but Leela actually eventually won this, despite my own Stockfish saying Stockfish was winning all the way through until about move 40 or so. But anyway, hope you enjoyed my analysis of this game. Please give me a shout out in the comments if you missed anything or saw something that I missed. And even if you have some of your own games, please let me know and I'll be happy to go through them in some videos. I'd love to start getting some subscriber games going. It'd be great. But anyway, hopefully I'll see you in the next video. Plan to complete the CCC11 games this year in time for 2020, where I hope to show more human games. Anyway, I'll see you next time.